With me now, our regular panel, David Gazzard, former Liberal strategist and advisor, and Eamonn Fitzpatrick, former Labor advisor. Gentlemen, great to see you both. Let's start with Optus, because that is the big story right now. Penny Wong's written to the Optus chief executive saying that they should pay for new passports. Eamonn, what do you make of where this is at and the government's response?
Well, I think this is a great example of why we needed Australia's first cybersecurity minister. That is a very, very clear signal this government sent early on when they put Claire O'Neill into the job. This is now another development in the story. It certainly won't be the last. For me, I think there's another element here. They are a foreign-owned telco. As we know, they are owned by Singtel, who are owned by a Singapore government-owned entity in its own right. It won't take much. If this isn't resolved domestically, we might see a bit of tension on that front. So it's got to be very, very carefully managed. On the consumer side, I mean, that is an appalling breach. I'm not sure really how the Optus executives survived this. I'm not sure how this is actually allowed to happen, to ever get to a point where there weren't the checks and balances in place. Interesting to see your last guest talk about that, but...
Well, that Karen Andrews was asking her about the fact that the telcos weren't caught under the umbrella of the Critical Infrastructure Act, like energy and water companies, and the argument at the time, as she said, was put to her by the industry that they were covered by separate rules. But the problem was those rules didn't require the same penetration testing that energy and water companies did. That's the problem.
Well, and I mean,
she conceded there was a hole there.
It's an interesting point, and we shouldn't forget that from a broader debate around how we go forward from this, utilities like Optus or NBN or Telstra are required to keep that data. They are required by ACMA and I think the Federal Police to keep that data because presumably the cops don't want to keep that themselves, right? So the broader risk question around who was on the board at Optus overseeing what turned out to be massive risk, right? Who was doing that? I think there's been a failure there as well. But these utilities are required by regulation now to maintain that data.
And I wonder whether this episode does see, you would think this is a no-brainer, you bring them within that Critical Infrastructure Act and make sure that they have the same penetration testing that we see for energy companies, water companies, because this is critical infrastructure.
Yeah, 100%. And what is especially surprising about this, I think, is so Optus, one of their big offerings traditionally has been to commercial and corporate clients, is their own cybersecurity centre. They've got a pretty amazing facility that they've run. So for this to happen to them, that is a massive double whammy, you know, not just the consumer side now, but some of their corporate clients will be absolutely reeling.
Huge.
As a result.
Well, they've obviously reassured the former government. They haven't been up to the task, and it's all very embarrassing for them. The National Integrity Commission, do you think they've got the right balance with this?
We'll see. You know, one of the problems with these integrity commissions, and I've been through the ringer on this myself, is you can just introduce so much stasis into the way that government operates that, you know, you end up being beholden to really just decision-making in departments because everyone gets so risk-averse around going forward on anything, right? And I think, you know, this is one of the reasons why, from what I can understand, the caucus has had significant reservations from this, but why it's good to have this referred off to a committee to sort of examine that, because you can get, you know, can go over the top with this.
Eamonn, your read on it?
Yeah,
because there is a higher hurdle to get the public hearings. I'll be joined, incidentally, by Kate Chaney and Allegra Spender after the top of the hour for their thoughts on all of this. They clearly want more public hearings.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think what's important here is you should never really take your law enforcement advice from a politician in the same way you shouldn't take political advice from a law enforcement agency, right? So I think Mark Dreyfus got it right when he said, actually, these matters are for the commissioner. That's the person you trust who is not political to make those calls. You can't really have public hearings for every single thing because often it may not be warranted. Mark Dreyfus, I think that is the right thing to do. Let's get the professionals to make a professional call.
The other thing I think is very important is that you get both the parties of government signing up to it, because if you don't, the body's undermined from the get-go. You might have some concerns on the crossbench, but you've got to have the parties of government sign up to it.
These are the adults in this game, right? They're actually the ones that take the decisions. The Teals, it's all care, no responsibility for the Teals, let's face it, right? Now, let's make sure it's right, because you can have, as occurs at state levels, politicians referring other politicians to make a political point, right? This is where we do not want to go here, right? Spurious and vexatious referrals to an integrity commission to besmirch the reputation of your factional opponent, of the candidate across the chamber from you. This is not where we want to go, right? And having public tests all the time that will absolutely end people's careers without a scintilla of evidence is not a great place to be.
Yeah, 100%.
Gentlemen, appreciate it as always. We'll see you next week.